helping people understand that they are ambassadors for Jesus Monday through Saturday. They're not just called to come and watch something on Sundays.
Hi, I'm Karl Vaters, and welcome to the Church Lobby, Conversations on Faith and Ministry. My guest is Dan Nichols, and we'll be talking about church collaboration and killing consumerism in a post-Christian context. Dan is a pastor in upstate New York, and he's the founder and president of Northeast Collaborative. It's a relational network that empowers pastors in the Northeast United States. Dan and I talk about a variety of subjects in this episode. It's all over the board, but all of it is good because Dan just has so many irons in the fire. So we're going to talk about pastoring in a post-Christian context. We talk about negotiating a cultural shift in a long-standing church. We'll talk about something that he is so good at, which is partnering with other churches of different sizes, different denominations, different traditions, and all coming together under the banner of Christ. And we're going to talk about how to bridge that big-small church divide that so often happens, that Dan reaches out so well across those bridges. This is also our first episode back after the De-Sizing the Church podcast series, so we're back on our regular schedule of every 2 weeks instead of every week. But this also means that we're doing the lightning round again, and we're doing the bonus content again. So don't forget to stick around when the interview is done. I'll come back with an overview of the content and some practical takeaways. All right, Dan Nichols, thank you so much for being in the church lobby. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Karl, man. This is a huge honor.
Hey, you have an amazing ministry that I have only become familiar with in the last year or so, but it's one of those things where it's hard to imagine we've only known each other that long because we've made several connections.
Yeah.
And the connections we've made have been such a blessing to me, and the ministry you do there is really remarkable. So I wanted to carry on this conversation because you and I basically were having a conversation at your church when I was there for a conference. And I said, you know what, this is really interesting. Let's let other people in on this. So this really is in a whole lot of ways the church lobby, because this conversation began in your church lobby.
Literally.
Yes, literally in your church lobby. And we said, okay, let's turn a mic on for this. We're not in his church lobby right now, but it is a continuation of that. So first of all, just to bring everybody up to speed as to who you are and what you're doing, give us a few minutes background as to your faith journey and your ministry journey that brings you to where you are today.
Yeah, I gave my life to Jesus after hearing my great-grandmother share a Bible story with me when I was 5 years old. My parents were in Israel, and they had been sharing the good news with me ever since I was in my mommy's belly. And so, 5 years old, I believe I truly surrendered my life to Jesus. So I'm 35 years old now. So I've been following Jesus for 3 decades, and it's been quite a journey. There's been times where I've wanted to leave the faith altogether, a lot of downs, but also a lot of God just proving over and over again that he truly is who he says he is, and Jesus is the real deal. So I'm so thankful that Christ saved me from myself, and at a very young age. And so when I tell my testimony, oftentimes I say, where I would have ended up, because before Jesus, it's like what I do, hit another kid in the nursery or something. But if Jesus hadn't gotten a hold of my life at an early age, I know the trajectory would have been just absolutely miserable. So really thankful that God saved me. I grew up in a pastor's home. My mom and dad are two of the godliest people I know, but I actually hated the church. I grew up seeing the worst sides of church you could possibly imagine. I could tell you stories that would make soap operas look tame, just crazy, crazy stuff.
That makes people want to stick around for the lightning round questions because that'll come up then. So.
Yeah, no, I saw just terrible things, but went to a Bible college just outside of Scranton, Pennsylvania. If any Office fans are out there, that's the only reason anyone knows about Scranton. Went to a Bible college, was reading Acts, got plugged into a healthy church, and God called me to be a church planter and then a network leader, and now a pastor of a 222-year-old church in the dead center part of New York State, upstate New York.
Your story parallels mine in so many ways. Raised as a preacher's kid, a godly, good home with great parents, came to Christ at an early age, came into ministry at an early age, So a lot of that is very similar to my story as well. So you are now in Cortland, New York. You've been there for how long?
3 years. In the middle of the pandemic, my best friend Joy, my wife of coming up on 11 years this month, actually, 11 years. We had just had our second child, Declan. So we have two boys, 8 and 4 now. Our youngest was born, and she just said, "Hey, look, I know God made you to be who you are, but I was on the road for about a decade doing missionary work." And she was just like, "Is there a way that you could be you, but we could have you off the road?" And
Mm.
God answered a prayer while I was actually sick with COVID in my bedroom, just crying out to God to bring a resolution. And God provided this incredible church that called us here 3 years ago. We arrived this month, actually.
Oh, wow. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so many subjects I want to go over with you before we got this recording started. We went through the list of them. Most of the podcasts I do, we do one main topic and maybe one or two side ones, but this one has 4 or 5 pieces that I want to tackle. But since you are in Cortland and we just talk about that, talk to me about that because we talked beforehand about this. You showed up at a church that was stable, that was strong. So we're not talking about a typical church turnaround here, but it did
Hmm.
need a significant shift of culture. So, what was it that you've been doing over the last 3 years? What culture was it? What kind of culture shift did it need to be? And how did that all come about, or has it been coming about?
Yeah. So the history of the church is 1801. Homer Baptist Church was planted by someone who was a convert of the Second Great Awakening. So a New
Mm,
England convert from the Second Great Awakening moved to Homer, New York, and planted Homer Baptist Church in 1801. And then about 15 years ago, the church almost closed down. They had built this beautiful, huge facility, $2.7 million.
yeah, it's a nice facility.
But they moved into it leaderless without a pastoral leader. So they did the building project themselves. They were the first
Wow.
church that the construction company had actually bonded with that didn't have a lead pastor during the construction project.
I have never heard of that.
Yeah, I know. It's a crazy
Wow.
story. Like
Yeah.
the people of this church are incredibly loyal and dedicated and just amazing, amazing people. And
Yeah.
so they built this facility, but there were a lot of fights and divisions. And 15 years ago, they were getting letters like maybe the church should just shut down altogether and just close up shop, especially with the 2.7 million in debt that they had. So my predecessor, Mike Dunn, incredible, humble man, one of the humblest men leaders that I've ever met. They gave him the keys and they said, "Hey, here you go. Please try to save this thing." So for 12 years, Mike Dunn did what I could never do or would have the patience to do. And he revitalized this church in a very healthy way, stabilized it, brought, leadership transitions, put together a very healthy board. It's just remarkable and paid off that 2.7 million in debt. So I got to inherit the fruit of his labor and the whole team and the congregation that gave sacrificially, and the congregants that stuck with this church are to be encouraged and just highly commended for their faithfulness before I showed up. So I got to come into a debt-free reality, but
Um,
there were just some cultural things that we've been working on to shift. I mean, one of them is, and this isn't unique to Grace. I mean, there's just in the American church, there's so much consumerism, right? And so
mm,
Grace is not a small church. And in larger churches, I think consumerism tends to be one of the biggest obstacles to health. And so we've been trying to kill consumerism while developing discipleship and also just a missional mindset, right? Like helping people understand that they are ambassadors for Jesus Monday through Saturday. They're not just called to come and watch something on Sundays. So God's been bringing huge fruit from that, and we're seeing all kinds of amazing things, not just growth externally or numerically, but growth internally. And so we measure success differently. We've gone from B3 to C4. So B3 is butts, buildings, budgets, and that's the old school measure, metrics for success. But we measure success by C4, character, community, conversions, and catapults. And that's what we're striving for. And we're seeing God do some incredible things that way.
yeah, I love that shift. Now, you came to a situation that a lot of people would consider ideal. Large building, fully paid off, stable, but there had to be a cultural shift. You and I have talked about that. So what was you've outlined that from the three B's to the four C's. How did that get implemented and what were some of the struggles that you faced in making that transition?
Yeah, so one of the biggest struggles, not just within Grace, but I would say Central New York, well, two things. One, a lot of cults started in Central New York. There's been a lot of cults historically. There's even a Netflix documentary that talks about this from Albany to Buffalo. It's called the Burned Over District historically, because people have
Right.
experienced spiritual abuse, religious trauma, horrible, horrible things. And so there is this, I fully believe there is demonic activity assigned, kind of like screw tape letters, although I know that's fictional, but I just think Satan has assigned demons to this area specifically for internal church pain, right? Religious abuse, spiritual trauma, all that stuff. That's a big obstacle. When you come in as a new spiritual leader and pastoring is not honorable today, no one trusts pastors today, especially in the Northeast. And I know we're going to get into that more in the lightning round, but that was a huge obstacle. And then also, indirect, unhealthy communication is a cultural norm, not only within the church, but outside the church. So, like, people have
Oh,
spent decades and decades not talking about the things they need to talk about, or only talking about the things that they should talk about with the wrong people, not directly. And so, just starting
interesting.
to model and develop a culture of healthy, direct communication with everyone in the church, but especially the staff team and the broader culture in our community, and modeling a community rhythm of healthy direct communication rather than unhealthy indirect communication.
What you're describing there is a very deeply rooted, unspoken culture. How did you even recognize that and then begin to address it? Because that's some really deep stuff.
Well, I recognized it by moving here and not
So the
just,
outside eyes helped?
yeah, just moving in and fully embracing that we as a family, myself, my wife Joy, and our two boys, Landon and Declan, we are going to be part of this faith community, not just lead it. And so moving in with that mindset of like, we are going to be fully immersed ourselves in embracing the life of Central New York, you just pick up on those things quickly. And my background as a church planter helped a ton. So my former life as a church planter, that was the first thing you did was you learned the demographics, you learned cultural rhythms, and tried to, be a missionary to, at that time, an urban context in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, just south of Scranton. But this is a much more rural context. In our church, it's primarily white collar, and I've heard it said brown collar people. So a lot of
Hmm.
agricultural farmers and that whole deal. And I mean, truly salt of the earth people. I mean, I'm telling you, Karl, I've traveled America all over. I've gone all over this nation. I still have yet to meet, like, this area has such incredible, loyal, salt of the earth people here in central New York, but certain things were never modeled, whether outside the church or inside the church. And healthy direct communication has been one of those things that we've really put our finger on and said, okay, we're not just going to preach on it. We're going
Mhm.
to do it. And it's excruciating. It's hard because when you bring the right people to the table for the right conversations that either need to be had in that week or have needed to happen within like the last few decades, it is not easy. It is hard and it takes a lot of time and it is very difficult, but it's worth it. It's
Yeah.
worth it. You're showing people a better way, the way of Jesus, rather than the way of this world, which is avoidance rather than healthy engagement.
Okay. So yeah, because I know you well enough to know that you are a straight talker. It's not even the typical like New York stereotype at all, because you're upstate New
Mm.
York, which is not what the rest of the
It's
country
very,
thinks
yeah,
about when we
upstate New
think
York
about
is
New
very
York.
different.
First of
It's a
all,
whole different
totally
world.
different. Yeah. But you are, and when I say direct, I mean that fully complimentarily. You're not rude, you're not abrupt, but you're honest, you're transparent, you are who you are. You talk to Dan Nichols for 10 minutes and you've gotten 10 minutes of Dan. You're not getting some upfront phony thing. I would imagine that this change of dynamic and the way people communicate came mostly from you and setting the example for it, or were there certain things that you had to do to be able to pull that out of them as well? And what might that have been?
Well, it's a big mix of things. I mean, for one, coming in and learning from the staff team what some of the real discipleship challenges are, right? Because our
Mhm.
goal, once I was able to come and just frame up, okay, what's the target, right? Is the target we just get a bunch more people to fill our huge auditorium to come and watch sermons? No, the target is character, community, conversions, and catapults. Okay, so if we're going to do that, just learning, okay, here's what that's going to take for our membership. Here's what that's going to take for the community. Here's what it's going to take for, and then actually stepping into it, because when I came, my predecessor, we have some similarities in theology and some similarities in values, which are awesome. And again, he's the humblest man that I've ever met, but like we're also very different in personality, different in style, different in
Yeah.
just how we approach leadership. And so, he was in his 60s, is in his 60s, and I'm in my 30s. So just even the generational change, it brought about just a ton of change right off the bat.
Sure.
And so when you come in and you're a catalytic change agent, when your predecessor, like one of his first words to me was, Dan, I'm a plodder. Like he just straight up told me, he's like, I'm a
Yeah.
plodder. And I looked back at him and I said, Mike, I don't think I've plodded a day in my life. So, the board, the staff, the search team, they all knew pace was going to be quite a
Hmm.
change and other things too. And so when you're a catalytic change agent, frankly, the need for healthy direct communication, it just astronomically like rises to the top because there's so much change that I didn't even know I was bringing, and all I brought was just like physically walking in here. Like in my
Yeah.
head, I'm going, we've hardly changed anything. And the
Right.
staff in the church are going, everything has changed, right? And so
Yeah.
in the early season, I mean, I don't think it's any secret, the church really embraced, the board said, here you go, whatever you want. And even like our website branding, all that stuff, like my first board meeting, I said, okay, we're not tweaking any of this. I'm carpet bombing all of it, and we're going to redo all of it. And a lot of pastors don't get this opportunity, but the board was like, go, hey, yes,
Wow.
we're thrilled. But at the beginning, it was a huge shift for the staff. And the staffing side of things was very challenging because I'm not Mike and Mike wasn't me. And it's just a whole different thing. So learning and modeling healthy direct communication when it's the hardest conversations, when it's extremely personal, when it feels like everything's on the line, but yet still leaning into it and going, we're going to walk the way of Jesus here. We're not going to walk the way of the world. And we're not going to go avoidance on this. We're going to go
Right.
healthy engagement with grace and truth together.
Yeah. Great. It's evident there's a reason this podcast is called The Church Lobby. Walking through the church lobby at Grace, it's
Mm,
really obvious. This is such a healthy, vibrant, forward-looking,
yes.
friendly church. I've been invited there, had the chance to speak there for a conference and to speak on a Sunday morning and to get that entire experience. And it is one of the healthiest church experiences that I've ever been in. And I've been in a lot, but yours stands out as one of the really, really healthy places. And yet you're in this burned out district or burned over district, as it's
Hmm.
been called historically. And you are in one of the least churched regions of the United States. The Northeast is a
Yes.
real spiritual wasteland right now. So talk to us a little bit about what does ministry and pastoring look like in the post-Christian context in New England? Because I know on the West Coast, we're experiencing it as well. And folks, Midwest and South, it's coming.
Yeah.
So let's hear from someone who's experiencing what's in your future.
Yeah. Right as we moved here, my church planting mentor, Ken Davis, who God used to plant 10 churches through a seminary training program, which I'll talk a little bit more about. He sent me an article by J.D. Payne, and it was new research done on the most unreached micro metro areas of the United
Hmm.
States. And would you believe it? Cortland, New York was in the top 10
Really?
nationally of the most unreached micro metro areas. And I think the reason we qualify for that, we have a SUNY Cortland campus, so State University of New York campus here. Yeah, so statistically, this region, our county is only 3.78% claiming a personal relationship with Jesus through faith in Jesus alone. So when you can stand before your congregation and be like, hey, missions is certainly 30 hours away for
Hmm.
sure, but this is showing us it's really 3 minutes away. in our spheres of influence, Monday through Saturday. And frankly, the stats are worse than Africa and Asia. And I mean, other
Hmm.
parts of the globe where we think that's where missions is. It's like, no,
Yeah.
we are living in an unreached people group.
Yes.
Literally, missiologically, we
Yep.
live in the new front lines, the new frontier of missions. And my friend, I have a friend that we're walking through some discipleship stuff with, and he tells me he's 75% of the way there. Okay. And here's what it means to be in a more post-Christian area, right? Like in other areas of America, you generally assume people are going to have some kind of a Christian understanding, maybe of some Bible stories or maybe even of scripture itself. My friend has been listening to the Bible for a while, and we sat down to do some more discipleship with some other guys, guys doing neat things there. But he goes, Dan, why didn't you tell me about the numbers? And I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, dude, I've been listening to the Bible for months, and I just found out that these numbers, like you can actually look up the passages because they're
Oh,
systematically structured to like help me find the verses. He goes, you didn't tell me that. I'm like, dude,
right.
I'm so sorry, right? Like, I
Yeah.
remember church planting in Wilkes-Barre and going to our youth group who God did some cool things, and we had a lot of kids from the community coming out, and I opened up the Bible and I just said, hey, let's do Q&A. What questions do you got? And one of the students goes, why do you keep reading from that book, man? And I'm like, you mean the Bible? He's like, yeah. He's like, they just wrote that to make money, man. Like, why do you keep reading from that book? Like, absolutely zero context, to which I was
Oh,
able to
yeah.
respond, well, you're half right. The publisher of this, what I have in
Yeah.
my hand, yes, they did publish this to make money. But the authors of the second half of this died because they believed in what they were writing. So you're kind of right, but you're really not. And let me show you why. But that's what ministry in a post-Christian culture is means you can't assume anything. A lot of preachers will
Right.
say, well, we all know the story of.
Oh,
Listen,
yeah.
if you're a preacher today in modern America, delete that from any of your sermons. Never, ever,
Agree.
ever say, well, we all know the story of, fill in.
Yep.
People don't.
And what's fascinating is not just where you are, the ignorance is such that they don't know that this is a dumb question. They don't feel an obligation to put up a front like they know it. But in
Right.
a lot of very Bible Belt places,
Hmm.
they don't know much more about the Bible than that kid who asked, why are you reading from that book, man? But they feel stupid to ask.
Yeah, like some kind of a
Yeah.
facade of religiosity. The good thing about serving in the Northeast is very few people feel like they need to do that. Like most
Yep.
people are just like, why would you go to church? Why would you say you're a Christian? It is not popular to say you are a genuine Bible believing
Yep.
Christian, whatever terminology you want to use. And, honestly, I try to hide the fact that I'm a pastor as long as I can. I actually, when people ask me, are you a pastor? Or, oh no, they say, what do you do for a living? I'll say, I'm a hope dealer. And they'll look at
Mhm.
me and they'll go, the heck is that? And I'm like, well, it's code for pastor, but I didn't want to freak you out. So I just say
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
then they're like, oh, he's normal. He's not like freaky and
Yeah.
trying to get my
Yeah.
money or whatever.
Wow. Yeah. 3.7% claim faith. Is that the number I got that you
Well, it
said?
claimed to be evangelical, which I know that
Oh,
term
got you.
has gotten
Right.
hijacked. And so, yeah, there's some people that maybe they don't have a real relationship, but maybe others just didn't want to be labeled with that label. But either
Right.
way,
But
that
nevertheless,
term
yeah.
used to mean I believe in scripture alone, faith alone, Jesus alone. Like, I have a personal relationship with God through faith in Jesus, is what that
Yeah.
used to mean.
Right.
And let's even say it's better than that. Let's say it's 5% or 7% or even 10%. Let's say it's so far off, right? Still, 90% of people don't know Jesus.
The likelihood that it's even into double digits is slim.
Very slim.
Because I compare this with I was doing a conference in Alabama 3 4 years ago, and somebody got up and told a story about how people aren't going to church anymore and they don't know Jesus. And here's the example he used. He stood in front of a Walmart in rural Alabama, and he just asked people who came out a question. And he says, I waited until I had 100 people. I asked this question of 100 people. Can you quote John 3:16 to me?
Mm,
And he looked at the audience of pastors, Alabama pastors. I was the only one in the place not from Alabama because I was the speaker they brought in. And he was just, how many do you think knew it? And they were like, looking around at each other. And he goes, only 35% could quote John 3:16 to me.
Oh
And
my
there were
goodness.
gasps of horror around the room. And I was like, whoa, 35% can quote John 3:16. Are you kidding me? I was thinking it would be, one or two people. I got to tell you, in California, if you hit one, two, three people who knew how to quote John 3:16, and they were in horror that it was only 35%.
Well, I remember when Tim Tebow put it on his on his face for
Yeah,
the national
yeah,
championship, it was Googled 94 million times
yeah, yeah.
because
People
people
just
had
don't
no
know.
idea what it was.
Yeah. And now a short break to talk about something else. If you like the content you're hearing, here are two things you can do to help us. First, forward this podcast to a friend. Secondly, consider becoming a financial partner on an ongoing or one-time basis. Just go to karlvaters.com/support, where you can give through Zelle, Venmo, PayPal, or Patreon using your bank account, credit, or debit card. This will help us as we continue to put these resources into the hands of the people who need them the most. Yeah. So we have to stop assuming this kind of biblical background, because even in a place where maybe 35% can quote John 3:16, I guarantee you that the explanation you gave about where we got our Bible and the sacrifices that were made by the original authors,
Yeah.
and the fact that the Bible is a library that has been curated rather than a single document from a single place, I guarantee you there is a frighteningly low percentage in the Bible Belt who know that as well. And so
Right.
it skews our understanding of Scripture, and we're not understanding, we're aware of it, we've got it, we hear it, but we're really not hearing it properly if we don't have the proper background to it. So going into a place that's completely ignorant, in some ways, as a pastor and a teacher, is really exciting, because you really get to start from ground zero without anybody assuming things about it.
Right. Well, even those who are less ignorant, what they know, and I'm putting "know" in air quotes, about scripture are so off target, right? Like I met with a couple, it was a tough meeting. It was a tough meeting because the spouse was in our church and she believed in new age stuff, but yet she thought that that wasn't a problem with Christianity. So we started talking it through, and her husband said, "Oh, I have a master's degree from I believe it was a Catholic university. I forget what university it was, but he said, listen, he goes, I could go on Wikipedia tonight and write my own Bible." And I looked back at him. I said, bro, 1,500 years, 40 different authors, 3 continents, 3 languages, 1 message. You cannot do that on Wikipedia tonight, bro. And his wife even looked at him and she nudged him and she goes, he's right. Yeah, you can't do that.
Wow.
But we were lovingly trying to help this couple see, like, one, new age religion is dangerous for you and your family, and it cannot coincide with biblical Christianity. And 3, we are a biblically Christian church, and this is what we're going to do. But just even when people believe that they know a lot about the scripture, oftentimes it's coming from, really faulty information.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the post-Christian context that you're in the Northeast, you have started a ministry called Northeast Collaborative, and this is how you and I first made a connection together, and where we're continuing to work together. But in Northeast Collaborative, you have done some things where you have reached out to other pastors, to other churches, and you have an amazing network of churches and pastors that are really working very tightly together over a really broad geographical region, and in a place that is very post-Christian and very difficult. So I know a lot of pastors who are listening would love to have much more cross-church and cross-denominational cooperation than they currently have. So walk us through some of what happened. How did that all come together so that you've got such a great spirit of cooperation over large segments of the geography and even cross-denominationally? How did that begin, and what are some ways that maybe other places can get that going? Because it's really healthy where you are.
Well, it started with a passion in my own heart from childhood. So I grew up in a phenomenal movement of authority of the Word of God, and theology matters, and I value those things. But there was also this isolationism, this whole we've got it right, everyone else has it wrong, and there was real resistance to the broader kingdom of God. And so I went to a Christian school where, growing up in my Baptistic background, I would have thought all my Baptist friends, if we have it all right, then they're going to really love Jesus. But most of my Baptist friends they didn't really love Jesus as much as my Assembly of God friends. My Assembly of God friends were like on fire for Jesus and all this. And so I started to recognize, wow, okay, the kingdom of God is way broader than our little tribe, right?
Yeah,
Whatever
yeah.
tribe you're a part of. And so I had a huge passion for that. I do remember when Together for the Gospel kicked off, and I remember, these leaders with different, secondary beliefs on theology could come together, and I was like, wow, that's crazy. And so just as a kid, I had a huge passion for it. And then went to a Bible college where I stopped hating the church and started loving the church, and that was big. And I had just always dreamed of seeing teamwork because I really believe teamwork is the best work. And I feel like one of the reasons the church is so weak and anemic in America is because we can't freaking get along. Like, in the Hobbit movie where like the elves and the dwarves are all fighting each other,
Right, right.
arguing, and then Gandalf's like, "Hey, Sauron's army is coming over that hill. We should probably pay attention to that."
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah, I just started to build relationships organically as a church planter in Wilkes-Barre with any pat. So as a church planter, I did two things. I moved into the center city and I started meeting with pastors, taking them to lunch, and just letting them know I'm not here to take your people. Like we're here for the 96 or 95% of people who don't know Jesus, and just started building bridges. And frankly, I'd even meet with some pastors that I'm not sure were saved. Some pastors I'm not even sure
mhm,
had a relationship with the Lord, but just engaging those relationships. And then we were planted through several different organizations, ABWE, the GARBC, and then also a ministry out of Baptist Bible Seminary called Project Jerusalem that planted 10 churches in the Northeast through seminarians who were getting part of their education through practical experience in church planting, which was amazing. But there was also a lid, like a theological lid with our seminary. And no disrespect to Baptist Bible Seminary, grateful for the training we received. But we just noticed that in order to reach the Northeast, we couldn't make secondary theological issues primary. Like to
yeah,
truly reach the Northeast, we're going to have to lay aside the secondary
yeah.
preferential or even convictional things and make it more about the main thing. So God birthed Northeast Collaborative out of a vision that I worked together with Dr. Ken Davis and Ben Rudolph on. Yeah, just brought together a team that has birthed this new network that empowers pastors to lead and launch healthy churches in the most unreached, unchurched, post-Christian corner of the nation. And, one story of this, so we have a lot of different ways that we go about building bridges, but one of them is our annual Northeast Leadership Summit. And the values and the ethos of not walking into spaces trying to one up each other, like not walking into spaces like, hey, how big is your church? Or, how much of a platform do you have or any of that stuff, but more just caring. So one of our church planners met a megachurch pastor at our Northeast Leadership Summit. And this church planner, friend of ours who's been part of NAC from the beginning, his dad passed away and his brother-in-law passed away all within a span of just a few months. So a ton
Wow.
of loss and grief. And this megachurch pastor had this value system where it doesn't matter about size. Like, I just want to help. So he and his staff put together this sermon package and spent hours and hours just putting this together for this church planner so that he could have some time to work through grief and to get some reprieve and to stay healthy. And
Yeah,
that is like a microcosm of the kind of fruit we're seeing come out of Northeast Collaborative, where it's just trying to go shoulder to shoulder with each other to see disciples made and churches started and leaders empowered and equipped. And when that is happening organically, when we're willing to just get over ourselves and get over our secondary preferences, it's amazing what God can do.
yeah. That leads really actually now into the conversation that you and I were having in the church lobby, which was this
Yeah.
bridging that big small divide.
Yeah.
Because this has been a real passion of mine for this ministry, one, for encouraging and resourcing small churches, but also there is that divide. There is this sense that a big church pastor can't learn from a small church, or that the only way the direction and wisdom can flow is from the big to the small, even though you and I know, and anybody who's studied size dynamic knows that
Mhm.
if you're above a certain size or below a certain size, you're not just talking about scale anymore. You're talking about a different type of thing. The rules change. And so there's
Yeah.
only so much that can be learned in either direction. But you've done a really good job at, as you've already showed in that one example, that the size differential becomes a secondary issue at best. So let's talk to that. What is it about this size dynamic that has got us pitting one against another, where the small church goes, those big churches must be compromising, or the big church goes, oh, those small churches must be settling for less. Where does that
Yeah.
come from, and how do we start overcoming it?
Well, I think you answer a lot of that in your newest book. So I'll give a shameless plug for your new book, Desizing the Church. It's absolutely tremendous. You answer a lot of the like larger questions. I'll just tell you experientially,
Sure.
it breaks my heart because Grace is not a small church. It breaks my heart when I get around a pastor, and this happens frequently, and they find out I'm the pastor at Grace. And I can tell instantly, it's like, it just gets weird right away. And so I try to lead out with, hey, I started in ministry pastoring a church of 4 people, and I was one of the 4. And I loved it. And it was amazing. And God did incredible things. And that generally just breaks the ice, and it's, we're right into it, because you're right. It isn't about size. Like, I have been around severely toxic small churches, but I also have been around extremely healthy small churches. I've been in some really toxic large churches, and I've also experienced some really healthy large churches. So we've got to shift the conversation from growth, which we almost always mean numerical, to health. And if we aim for health, we're going to get growth, I believe, both externally and internally every time. So yeah, health is the real goal. And God's given me amazing opportunities to lead a small church, a medium-sized church, and then a large church. And all 3, there's pros and cons. And honestly, I think it's harder to be a healthy large church. I think it's actually easier in some ways to be a healthy small church, which is why I believe the future of the American church is actually going to be smaller in size as far as local expression. I really do. I think, even now, 92% of churches see 250 people or less on a Sunday. 92% see 250 or less. And so we have to shift that conversation. And I try to do it as much as I can with pastors, and our church is working overtime to bless so many churches in our region. Actually, this Christmas, I haven't even announced this at our church yet, so no one at Grace is allowed to listen to this podcast, but no, I'm kidding.
Well, by the time the podcast is out, you'll probably will have announced it.
Oh, great. Well, our Christmas offering, our board, this was an incredible thing. I pitched this idea. I said, hey, we've been going deeper with 9 churches that are right around us. I mean, literally, like right around us. We believe these 9 churches, like, they have so much potential. They're doing great things. If they gave us evangelism plans, could we give them our Christmas offering? Last year, our Christmas offering was $52,000, which, depending on your context, that might be not much money or a ton of money, whatever. But for us, it's a lot of money in our Northeast, Central New York context. It's a ton of money. So I have no idea what this year's Christmas offering is going to be, but our board, the cool thing was they weren't like, oh yeah, that's an okay idea. They were like, how could we not do this? And that was so exciting. They were like, we have to do this. So we're giving our Christmas offering to 9 churches that are literally right around us so that they can execute evangelism plans that they've submitted in 2025.
See, I love hearing that, because one of the things that I'm often asked about is, okay, if you're not counting butts in the seats, and they never say it exactly that directly, but if you're not counting butts in the seats, what metrics do you use to determine whether or not a church is healthy? And I think you've just named one. Here is a spirit of generosity that says we're going to give to these other churches. And it's not just, hey, yeah, give me a call if you need me, but I'm showing up with a check. That is such a tangible way. Here's what I'd like to talk to you about in the bonus round. So those of you who are listening, if you are a subscriber or if you are a regular supporter, you know that you can get all of the bonus round material by signing up for the subscription. So if you aren't yet subscribed to the newsletter, go to karlvaters.com/subscribe, or you can go to karlvaters.com/support. If you become a supporter or a subscriber, you get the free weekly newsletter. And in it, we give you a link to all the bonus material for all of the podcasts in which we do bonus material. What I want to talk to you about in this bonus material is that spirit of generosity. We have moved in our culture from people who give out of duty to people who want to see a church being generous. And your church is a very generous church. And it's not about the amount of money that's given. It's not that it
Right.
was 52,000. It was that you're taking up an offering to give to 9 other churches than your own. So I want to talk about how you create that kind of a spirit of generosity within a church. And
Mm.
let's walk through some of that and see what we can get to that. I think that'd be some great bonus material. So if that's something you think would help in your church, again, go to karlvaters.com/subscribe for free, or karlvaters.com/support. And if you become a regular supporter or a subscriber to the newsletter, you will get links to all of the bonus material, including this conversation we're going to be having with Dan soon. But before we conclude this podcast, let's do the lightning round, shall we?
Woohoo.
All righty. Okay, let's do it. Question number 1. What are the biggest changes you've seen in your field of ministry in the last few years, and how have you adapted to it?
2 answers to this one. One, just what I referenced before about how pastoring isn't honorable anymore. Growing up as a pastor's kid, I remember people knowing my dad was a pastor and seeing that as honorable. I mean, I cannot tell you how fast I feel like that has changed. And my wife and I watched a movie on Netflix years ago called Spotlight. And it was the story, the Boston Globe article that blew the cover off of all of the Catholic Church sex scandals. And that rocked the Northeast right around the 9/11, September 11th attacks. And that movie, if you haven't seen that movie, you should. It's a really important, crucial movie, especially for ministry leaders to understand what's going on in our culture. But yeah, pastoring not being honorable. And then number 2, on a positive side, this hunger for authenticity. Like as a millennial and now even trying to figure out Gen Z myself, which feels weird. I feel like I'm old, but I don't feel old. I don't know why, but both within millennials and Gen Z, I'm sensing, and in older generations too, there is so much more of a hunger for authenticity rather than production. No more caricatures, no more facades. And I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, I fully agree. My generation, the boomers, we introduced one size fits all. We liked the big production. We liked all of that. And some good things came out of that. Large scale production gives you iPhones and great technical things that are very, very helpful. But there is then this side where there's a loss of authenticity. So now new generations are requiring that. But what I'm noticing is, as you pointed out, when we say this generation, I don't just mean people between this age group and this age group. I mean all people of all ages living now. So this generation, as in everybody alive on the earth right now, of any age, is far more likely to consciously seek out authenticity than size and production value.
100%.
Yeah, because production value is easy now. It used to be that authenticity was everywhere and it was hard to find high production value. Now, high production value is everywhere and authenticity is rare. All right, let's go to the second one. What free resource, like an app or a website maybe, that has helped you lately that you would recommend for small church ministry?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give them very quickly because I got 7. Bible Project on YouTube, gotquestions.org, the Bless app from the Ferguson brothers. Solarium is a free evangelism app where it's just artwork. And what you do is you just show the art. There's like several options of artwork, and you just show someone, hey, what describes your attitude or your mood or how you're feeling right now? And you're able just to engage a conversation about the soul simply through art. It's called Soularium, Soularium. Sean McDowell's YouTube channel is incredibly helpful with apologetics. Constable's Notes on Google, if you just Google Constable's Notes, free commentaries on all 66 books of the Bible. And then the Everand app, Everand. It's only $10 a month, but you get almost every book you could imagine, especially Christian books, theological books, latest books. It's amazing. For $120 a year, $10 a month, Everand, I have rarely searched for a book and not found it. Sometimes it's not Audible, but if there is an Audible, it's usually on there. And then also digital to read. So yeah, those are some quick ones.
That's great. We will put links to all of those in the show notes. It does not surprise me at all that you had a bunch of things under that category, because you are one of the most well-organized. This is something that I just, for time, I thought I need to get into, some organizational ideas and hacks, because the amount of balls you've got in the air and the thoroughness with which my every interaction with you has been extremely thorough and extremely well done, and while still keeping a sense of I got all the time in the world for you, Karl. That is an extraordinary gift, and I think we could learn that from you. So maybe at some other time we'll have you on about that, about all of your efficiency apps, because you got to be awfully good at it. So those are 7 good. We'll put them all in the show notes. Next one, what's the best piece of ministry advice you've ever received?
4 words from my dad: stay close to Jesus. It sounds so simplistic, but it isn't. It might be simple, but it's not simplistic. It is so powerful. Those 4 words have kept me remembering the why and remembering that perseverance and contentment are possible, even when I didn't think they were.
Wow. Your dad sounds like my dad. Your dad's probably about my age, but your dad still sounds like my dad.
Stay close to Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. Number 4, what's the funniest or weirdest thing you've ever seen in church?
Well, I had a first a few weeks ago, and I think this was a good sign because it seemed like one of our guests at Grace was feeling extremely comfortable to visit our church. And I don't know, I hadn't had this happen before. I'm panning as I'm preaching, and all of a sudden, one of our guests is breastfeeding in like the 3rd row, but like I didn't think there was any cover. But here's the awkward thing about it: as you're preaching, you can't like you can't like check, right? So I'm just panning. I'm going, oh, okay, and then pan back, and I'm like, you know what? It doesn't matter. Like they feel super free and welcome to start breastfeeding without a cover right in the front of the sanctuary, and that's a good sign when we're welcoming guests that way. That was good. I also remember forgetting my bottom line when I was preaching years ago. I was like way in front of my notes, and I said, of course, the only thing we have to remember today is I couldn't get any of the words out, and I had to do this walk of shame that felt like an hour back to my notes, and then just like keep crow and be like, I'm sorry, guys. I don't even know what happened there.
Wow. That is every preacher's fear right there. Or then when you do go back to it, it's not even written down, and then it's a complete loss. That's huge. Hey, so how can people find you online if they want to follow up with anything, particularly if they're in the Northeast and they'd like to be a part of Northeast Collaborative, which I highly recommend?
Yeah, NE Collaborative, N for North, E for East, necollaborative.com. You can find more information about Northeast Collaborative. Grace Christian Fellowship is GCF Cortland, without the U, no U, CORTLAND.org. And then my personal website is danandjoy.com.
All righty, terrific. I really encourage you to reach out to do that, especially if you're in the Northeast. Connect with Dan. This is an opportunity for us to work together in ways that don't often come along, and that quite often we feel alienated in ministry. And Dan has an amazing way through both the church and Northeast Collaborative to be able to reach out and make you feel like you're not alone in ministry, whatever sized your church might be. So we're going to go into bonus material. So we're going to end this. But again, if you want the bonus material, go to karlvaters.com/subscribe or karlvaters.com/support. And you can get the bonus material. We're going to talk about how to create a spirit of generosity within your church. Dan, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Karl.
Dan is such a great example of how new generations are seeing the church differently and how they're leading it in exciting new ways that actually really harken back to the church's roots. They know that the healthfulness of a church that is constantly looking outside their own walls needs to reach into a profoundly unchurched community in some encouraging ways, and Dan does that better than anybody I know. Maybe the strongest point of the ministry that Dan Nichols has, that Northeast Collaborative has, and that Grace Christian Fellowship is doing is that they're showing a profoundly post-Christian culture that churches from a variety of backgrounds, denominations, sizes, and contexts can work together, that we can put aside the secondary issues so that the world can see a church that really loves each other and loves Jesus together. This is what a post-Christian world is hungry for. This episode was produced by Veronica Beaver. It was edited by Phil Vaters. Original theme music was written and performed by Jack Wilkins of jackwilkinsmusic.com. The graphic design is by Solomon Joy, And me, I'm Karl Vaters, and I hope to talk with you again in the church lobby.